Storage unit had been padlocked for 31 years, and my wife had made me promise twice, once when we married and once on our 25th anniversary, that I would never try to open it. I kept that promise right up until the morning after her funeral, when her lawyer called me into his office and handed me a small brass key. Her name was Beverly. We met in Sudbury in 1988 when I was 32 and she was 29, both of us working at the same mining supply company, she in accounting, me in equipment logistics. We married the following spring in a small ceremony at her parents' house on Lamsey Lake. She wore her mother's dress, altered at the waist. I wore a rented suit that was slightly too short in the leg, and she laughed when she saw me walking toward her, and that laugh was the best thing that had ever happened to me up to that point in my life. We had 33 years together. We raised 2 kids. A son who is now 40 and lives in Calgary with his family, and a daughter who is 37 and lives 20 minutes from where Beverly and I spent most of our marriage, in a split level on a quiet street in Berry. We were ordinary people. We were happy mostly. We argued about money when the kids were small and about nothing much at all once they were grown. Beverly liked gardening and long drives and true crime podcasts. I like hockey and building things in the garage and pretending I didn't like the true crime podcasts, even though I always ended up listening to them with her. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in October of 2022. By the following March, she was gone. I do not have the words for what that year was. I am not going to try to find them. What I will say is that when I sat across from her lawyer 6 days after the funeral, a quiet man named Mr. Ashworth, who had handled our affairs for nearly 2 decades, I was not expecting anything unusual. Beverly had always been practical about money. We had a will, a joint account, RRSPs that had been carefully managed. I assumed we were there to go through the normal paperwork of grief. Then he slid a manila envelope across the desk, and inside it was a key. Small, brass. A number stamped on the bow, 140. Alongside it was a document. A rental agreement for a climate-controlled storage facility on the edge of town, in the name of Beverly Margaret Calloway. Her maiden name, not mine. Signed in 1993. Renewed annually every single year for 31 years. Paid by a separate bank account I had never known existed. Mr. Ashworth let me sit with that for a moment. Then he told me there was one more thing. The storage facility had a secondary document on file. A sealed letter, held by the management office, to be opened only upon proof of Beverly's death. The letter was addressed to me. I drove to the facility that same afternoon. It was a grey Thursday in April. Still cold. Patches of dirty snow along the edges of the parking lot. The kind of day that feels exactly right for receiving news you are not ready for. The manager, a young woman, checked my ID and the death certificate and then handed me a small sealed envelope with my name written on it in Beverly's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. The way she always wrote the letter G in my name, slightly looped at the bottom. Gordon. She had written my name on birthday cards, grocery lists, reminder notes stuck to the fridge for 33 years. I stood there in a fluorescent-lit office smelling of cardboard and stale coffee and felt the floor shift slightly under me. I sat in my truck before I opened it. I needed a minute. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten. I will not share all of it. Some things are between a husband and a wife, even after one of them is gone. But I will share enough that you understand what I found when I finally unlocked Unit 114. Beverly wrote that she had been keeping the storage unit since the year before we married. She had started it, she said, because of something that happened with her family when she was young. A situation involving her parents' estate, money that disappeared, siblings who fought until they stopped speaking to each other entirely. She had watched her mother cry over documents at a kitchen table for 3 years. She had made a private decision, at 28 years old, that she would never allow that to happen to us. So she had been quietly setting money aside. Not stolen money, not hidden in any dishonest sense. She had an inheritance from a great uncle that she had never disclosed. Modest at first, a little over $40,000, and she had invested it slowly, carefully, over decades. She had a gift for numbers that went far beyond what her accounting job required. She had read obsessively, learned quietly, made decisions she never once discussed with me. She said in the letter that she had intended to tell me many times. On our 10th anniversary, when our son was born, when our daughter graduated, she kept finding reasons to wait. She kept thinking there would be a better moment. There never was. In Unit 114, she wrote, I would find documents, files, and a secondary letter for our 2 children. She asked me to go alone the first time. She asked me to please try to understand. The unit was larger than I expected, 10 by 15 feet, which in Ontario runs somewhere between $150 and $200 a month. Though Beverly had arranged a long-term rate that was considerably lower, it was neat, everything labeled in her handwriting, banker's boxes stacked along one wall, a small filing cabinet, and in the center of the unit, sitting on a folding table, a sealed plastic bin with my name on a piece of masking tape. I opened the bin first. Inside were 31 years of statements, investment accounts, a TFSA I had never heard of, a non-registered account with a brokerage in Toronto, municipal bonds she had purchased in the 90s when they were paying reasonable rates, a small piece of a REIT she had bought in 2006 that had quietly grown for 16 years. Everything documented, everything organized, every decision annotated in a small spiral notebook she had kept alongside the files. The total, as of her last update in November, 4 months before she died, was just over $680,000. I sat down on the concrete floor of that storage unit and I stayed there for a long time. I am 64 years old. I worked logistics for 22 years, then ran a small equipment rental business for another 15. I have never been poor, but I have never had that kind of money. Beverly and I had a comfortable life and a modest retirement account and a house with a mortgage we finished paying in 2019. We talked about maybe doing a trip to Nova Scotia. We talked about whether we could afford to replace the deck. She had been sitting on $680,000. I did not know whether to be devastated or grateful. Honestly, I am still not entirely sure. What I felt in that moment, sitting on a cold concrete floor in April, was something I cannot cleanly name. It was grief and bewilderment and a strange, aching tenderness, because every annotation in that notebook was written in her handwriting, and she was gone, and she had been doing this for me, for us, for our children, every single year for 31 years, and she had never said a word. I went home. I did not call anyone that night. I sat in the kitchen and read through the spiral notebook from the first page to the last, and I felt like I was meeting a version of my wife I had always lived alongside but never quite seen. She was brilliant with money. I had known she was capable. I had not known she was this. I waited 2 weeks before I told our children. I wanted to understand everything first. I went back to Unit 114 several times, read through every box, had Mr. Ashworth help me understand the legal situation. The accounts were in Beverly's name, but as her estate, they passed directly to me. Tax implications were manageable. Everything was legal. Everything was clean. She had been meticulous. When I sat our son and daughter down in the living room, my son had flown in from Calgary. I told them what I had found. I showed them the letter Beverly had left, or at least the parts that were meant for them. There was a separate note she had written to each of them, sealed individually, and I gave those to them privately. My son was quiet for a long time. He is an engineer, logical, not given to big reactions. He asked several clarifying questions. He seemed more than anything stunned. My daughter cried. Then she said something that I have been turning over in my mind since the moment she said it. She said, Mom always knew exactly what she was doing. She just never made a big deal out of it. That is one way to look at it. Here is where I need to be honest with you, because this is not a simple story with clean edges. About a month after that conversation, my son called me from Calgary. He had been thinking, he said. He wanted to talk about the money. Not in a bad way, he was quick to say. Just to understand what the plan was. He thought it might make sense to liquidate the non-registered accounts sooner rather than later, given interest rate trends. He mentioned that he and his wife had been looking at property out west and that real estate was getting away from them. He was not asking for anything outright, but the shape of the conversation was clear enough. 3 days later, my daughter came over for dinner and mentioned, more or less casually, that she and her husband had been discussing a renovation, the kitchen, possibly an addition, and that if I was going to be reallocating the investments anyway, it might be worth thinking about whether some of it could be structured as an advance on her inheritance. She used that phrase specifically, advance on her inheritance. I did not say much either time. I told them both that I was still working through things and that no decisions were being made quickly. Both conversations ended politely. But I sat with a weight in my chest afterward that I did not like. Beverly had left that money to me, not to them. She had made that decision deliberately. Mr. Ashworth confirmed that she had specifically chosen to structure everything so that it passed to me first, with a separate and modest inheritance set aside for the children in a different account. She had thought it through. She had wanted me to have the security. She had imagined, I think, that I would be the one left behind. She had been right. The money was mine. And the fact that our children, good people, people I love, had moved within weeks from grief to calculation told me something I needed to sit with. I did not resent them. I want to be clear about that. Grief does strange things to people, and the appearance of unexpected money does even stranger things. I understood the impulse, but I had spent 33 years with a woman who had quietly protected our family's financial future without ever once making anyone feel obligated or pressured. And I was not about to make hasty decisions under the pressure of my children's timelines. I told my son and my daughter, at a dinner I arranged for the purpose, that I intended to honor Beverly's intentions. The money would remain invested, managed carefully, and they would be taken care of in time and in the appropriate way. I told them that I did not want to spend the remaining years of my life having conversations about money where they had once spent conversations about family. I said it clearly, and I said it once. My son accepted that without argument. He seemed, I think, a little relieved. My daughter was quiet for a moment, and then she said she understood. We ate the rest of the dinner talking about her kids, about my grandson's hockey season, about the summer. It has not been entirely smooth since then. There have been a few more probing questions, a few moments where the subject comes up sideways, but nothing that cannot be managed with patience. The harder thing, the thing that still sits with me, is the question I have been living with since that afternoon on the floor of Unit 114. Why didn't she tell me? I've asked myself this more times than I can count. In the letter, Beverly said she was afraid. Not of me. She was clear about that. She said she was afraid of what money does to things. She had watched it do terrible things to her own family. She had wanted to protect what we had, and the only way she knew how to do that was to keep it separate, keep it quiet, keep it as a kind of safety net that existed outside the ordinary textures of our life together. I understand that logic. I do. But understanding it and making peace with it are two different things. There are moments when I feel a surge or something close to anger. 31 years. Hundreds of small conversations about budgets, about whether we could afford a new furnace, about deferring the deck renovation for another year. She sat in those conversations knowing what she knew, and she said nothing. That is a choice. That is a significant choice, and I have had to reckon with it honestly. There are other moments. More of them, I think, as the months have passed, when I feel the love in it so clearly that it knocks the breath out of me. She was protecting us. She was doing the thing she knew how to do. The thing she had taught herself quietly over 3 decades, in the only way that felt safe to her. She was not selfish. She was not dishonest in the way that word usually means. She was carrying something alone because she did not trust the world not to ruin it. And that is a very particular kind of loneliness that I wish I had known about sooner, so that I could have helped her carry it. The storage unit is emptied now. The documents are with Mr. Ashworth. The accounts have been consolidated, and I have a financial advisor helping me manage everything responsibly. I have made no extravagant decisions. I replaced the deck. I booked a flight to Halifax for June, which Beverly and I always meant to do. I'm going alone, which is the hardest part. But I will walk along the waterfront in Lunenburg that she had marked in a travel magazine she kept by the bed, and I will find the restaurant she had circled, and I will have whatever she would have ordered, and I will sit there for a while. That is what I have to offer her now. Small acts of loyalty to the life she imagined for us. Small ways of carrying it forward. The brass key is still on my keychain. I know I do not need it anymore. But it is the last thing she put into my hands in a manner of speaking. And I am not ready to let it go. I am 64 years old, and I am learning, for the first time without her, how to trust that love does not require a complete accounting of every secret in order to be real. It took me a while, but I think I am starting to believe it. That brass key is still on my keychain. I keep telling myself I take it off one of these days. I never do. I've thought a lot about why Beverly made the choices she made, and the longer I sit with it, the more I think I understand something that took me most of my life to see clearly. The things we carry alone, the quiet decisions, the small sacrifices made without fanfare, the protection we offer people we love without ever asking for credit. Those things don't disappear when we do. They surface. They leave a record. And the record Beverly left behind told me more about who she was than 33 years of daily life had fully shown me. She was careful in a way that required real intelligence. Not just the kind you learn in school, but the kind that comes from watching the world closely and thinking several steps ahead of where most people bother to look. She read. She studied. She made disciplined decisions in silence for 3 decades and never once used them as leverage or sought recognition for them. That kind of quiet competence is rare, and I did not honor it nearly enough while she was alive to receive the honor. The hard part, the part I keep returning to, is that wisdom like hers doesn't come free. It cost her something to carry that alone. She wrote in her letter that she had been afraid. Not of me, she was clear about that, but of what money does to the spaces between people. She had seen it in her own family, watched it corrode things that should have been permanent. So she made a choice that she believed would protect us. And she held to that choice through every renovation we deferred, every budget conversation we had at the kitchen table, every year that passed without her saying a word. That is not weakness. That is a particular kind of strength that does not ask for applause. And then there is my son and my daughter. I love them. I want to say that plainly. But love does not make us blind to the moments when the people we love fall short of who we know they can be. When the inheritance conversation started, carefully phrased, reasonable sounding, arriving faster than grief had any right to clear, I had a choice about how to respond. I could have reacted with anger, or I could have responded with the same steadiness that Beverly had modeled for me across 3 decades. I chose steadiness. I said what needed to be said once clearly, and I did not repeat it. I think that is what she would have wanted. I think that is what the situation asked of a person trying to behave with some integrity. What I've learned at 64, on the other side of the worst year of my life, is that character is mostly invisible until it is tested. Beverly showed up in a storage unit in Barrie, in 31 years of carefully annotated statements, in a letter addressed to me in her looped handwriting. Mine had to show up in a quieter way, in how I handled the money, in how I spoke to my children, in whether I let grief make me bitter or whether I chose, slowly and imperfectly, something closer to grace. I'm going to Halifax in June. I'm going to sit at the restaurant she circled in that travel magazine and order whatever looked good to her. I'm going to try to see the harbor the way she imagined it. That is the only answer I have found to the question of how you keep living after someone like that is gone. You carry the best of what they were. You try, at least, to be worthy of it.